Hey, so welcome to Unfiltered Us. Thanks for joining us today. And we like to have interesting conversations about things that are applicable to us in our lives and have an impact on our lives. And we realize that other people want to be part of these conversations. So that's why we're doing this. And today we thought we would talk about the impact of families' expectations. And I think it's a topic that's relevant to all of us. And
Hope you enjoy it.
To today's conversation. Hope you'll have a glass of wine and join us. Cheers.
And today we will, in parallel, make Fleischpflanzerl,
which I can never pronounce.
German dish, one of my childhood favorites. Comfort food, amazing.
Yeah.
Kids all love it.
Kids all love it too.
And yeah, so if you like what we're doing, please like and subscribe. We're just getting this channel started, so it always helps if you let us know what you like, what you don't like, leave something in the comments. And if you have any topics that we should discuss in the future, please let us know. Mm-hmm. Yes, so let's get chopping and let's get talking. So what was the
role of family expectations?
Yeah, so I think that
how they shape our lives, right?
Yeah, but so the topic came up yesterday. So we were invited with a friend yesterday here in Zurich, for a former colleague from our previous business, and we had an interesting conversation. Her mother, unfortunately, recently passed away quite young, at age 55, I believe, from cancer, and they had a very special relationship in the sense that she always said this was more like a
friend,
than a parent. And so we get this whole conversation started around, what is it, how do parents shape, or our relationship with parents shape us in real life and day-to-day life, essentially, right?
And also specifically talking about the expectations of parents and how that shapes our behavior, and that even as adults that have got their own successful lives, or who have our own successful lives, like there's always a part of us that wants to kind of keep our parents happy, I guess.
And to fulfill certain expectations. Mm-hmm. And that was quite interesting, because how this became a topic was also that the partner of our friend is also a very successful consultant with a very big company, and climbed the ladders very young, the career ladders. So there's essentially nothing you could say about his career, about his success, and still, whenever the parents are over, there seems to be this endless battle around achievements and discussions and expectations, and
and we could all really relate to that.
Absolutely,
right? Yeah.
Absolutely. So,
and just talking about why it is that we have this feeling of wanting to make our parents happy, I guess, or make our parents proud of us. And I mean, I think it goes back to the fact that these primary relationships, or these early relationships, are what define us, right? And they, I think also children of, from an evolutionary point of view, babies and children are fully reliant on their parents. And so children learn to behave in a way that will keep their parents safe, or keep their parent close, so that they can be kept safe. So it's like a survival mechanism whereby, as a child, you realize your total dependence on your parent, and so you will do whatever you need to do in order to keep that parent safe and keep that parent close, not safe. You want to be kept safe, right? So it's just so fascinating how that dynamic and that pattern is established so early in our childhood, or even as babies, and then extends all the way through to adult life.
And sometimes very late into adult life and adulthood, right? That's the interesting part.
Yeah.
You would think that by the time you're mostly independent.
Yeah,
and have
in your
own life
40s and paying your
you're-
own bills and
well, not even in your
raising
40s, like
your own
probably
kids.
typically way earlier than that, right? When
Yeah.
once you're out of school and earning your own money and living
Yeah.
alone, then that should be a thing of the past.
Yeah.
Not something that's kind of in your.
So what's your experience? Parental expectations.
That is me swearing there. No. Yeah, well, my my expectation is quite similar.
So your expectation.
My expectation, my experience. That's a good question.
I said, so what's your experience?
My experience. So my experience. Well, I, as you know, very well from my parents. My parents were always quite demanding, right? Quite keen on, let's say, material success and having a great career and achieving a certain amount of status in society. And in a way that started when I was very young and at school, where nothing was ever good enough, so to speak, right? No grade was ever good enough, and no, even if I only had A's in the US, or the one in Germany or a 6 in Switzerland, so the top grades, there was still some sort of underlying criticism about my overall achievement, right? And if it was all perfect, and there was one aspect that wasn't perfect, then that was the only thing that came into focus, not the achievement of whatever happened. And that had continued and continues still to this day, right? So even if I was running companies and started companies where we had millions in turnover and healthy businesses and dozens of employees, there would still always be that comparison to, yeah, but why are you not the CEO of Microsoft now? Why are you not the CEO of the Deutsche Telekom, German Telekom? Or why are you not, running Daimler? And you see this person is, he's 45 and he's in the board of this big automotive company. So why aren't you? So there's always this expectation to deliver. And I have to say, I found that quite stressful throughout all my life, right? So having these constant expectations, but also never being truly able to fulfill the expectations, right? Never being enough in a sense, right? Never I know that I could probably be whatever president of the United States, the first, if it would be possible, the first German president of the United States. I would probably hear, yeah, well, why is the economy so shit? Why aren't you doing anything about it, right? So that would be probably the next thing. Yeah, I mean, I not that I'm holding any grudge against my parents, not at all. I see where they were coming from. So my parents are from this, old Eastern European post-war generation where things were extremely tough. I mean, both my parents were born into the Second World War. Essentially, went through what I can only assume were incredibly tough times when they were younger, as did their families. They're very strictly raised, right? As quite common in Eastern European countries. So it's not about love and happy family. It's about, just, the strict authoritarian mindset. Oh, Jesus, the onions are killing me here. Yeah, and then also they were incredibly hardworking. They eventually emigrated to Germany, built a very successful business in the medical space, and worked extremely hard. So I fully understand where this mindset is coming from. But at the same time, and I believe I'm not the only one who had similar experiences with their parents or with whoever was an important figure when you were growing up. It can take a toll on you, right? Because it's in a way the whole relationship that you form with these people is not around bonding on a personal level. It evolves around your value in relation to your achievements, right? Yeah, and that's quite.
So that feeling of not being valued for who you are, but rather being valued for your achievements, right?
Correct.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I think, as you said so well, the reality is that your parents had a certain background, which I think was really quite harsh in many ways.
No, of
And
course.
so,
I'm not questioning that, and I'm not.
yeah,
As again, I want to be very clear that I'm not holding any grudge against my parents for being who they were, because they were wonderful parents and they supported me and did a lot for me and sacrificed a lot, I'm sure. So it's more like it was never a pleasant experience back in the days until now, right? They're both still alive. They're both in their mid-80s. And I think to this day, our relationship is essentially formed by or around the topic of fulfilling certain expectations.
yeah,
Right. And if I compared it to what our colleague said yesterday, who herself had this very open, almost like best buddy friends kind of relationship with her mom, whereas her partner and husband had a similar experience to mine, right?
yeah.
That can be quite interesting.
So for me, it was, I was raised in a family where we were always told that we had to go and get a university education, and we had to get a degree, and we had to become a professional. So there was always this conversation around, not studying the arts or anything like that, because that was all just bullshit, according to my father.
Who is a civil engineer?
Is a civil engineer and civil structural engineer with a PhD and another degree, another commerce degree on top of that. And honestly, if you had to meet my dad, I love him dearly. The first question he will ask you is, so what did you study? And what work do you do? And so my dad's entire, the entire way he values people is through what they studied. So more around what they studied. He's not as interested in financial status or things like that. But if you've got a PhD, he'll think you're fantastic. And God forbid you get a PhD in a certain field and then decide not to use that, because then that's considered a waste of a brain. And it's just so interesting because my father is absolutely fixated on academic achievements. And so I think he then struggles to understand that people can be valuable without those academic achievements. Why don't you put some more of that? And I remember the first time my ex doesn't actually have a university degree, and yet managed to build a very successful business and had a very good reputation in the industry and etc. And my dad really struggled with that. My dad really struggled to categorize him, and to sort of understand what was his value. Because now here's this guy who doesn't have a degree, doesn't have an official qualification, and yet has, built a very successful business. And my dad was like endlessly fascinated by this. And I mean, really did respect him, but it was very much out of the norm for my father. He really, really struggled to come to terms with it. And the conversations I have with my parents nowadays is the reality is that my profession as a physiotherapist really just boxed me, So yes, it was a helpful and useful profession, and I'm glad that I did it. And it enabled me to have my own business and to be at home when my kids were little and etc. And yet when I moved to Switzerland, then suddenly I couldn't practice my profession because that qualification isn't recognized here in Switzerland. And so it's been a whole process to get it recognized here. And so actually, for example, my Pilates instructor qualification was much more useful than my physio qualification here. And that box is not always so useful. And yet my dad still struggles to get his mind around it, And so when I say to him, for example, that I don't think that my kids will necessarily go and become professional in X,
Like
Y, and Z.
academics in the traditional sense,
Yeah,
right?
it's not even that my dad wants people to become academics. I mean, he'd love it if people did become academics, but he wants you to have a profession. And I think that nowadays, the whole way that the world works is very different, and I don't think it helps to have a profession, right? But anyway, once again, I mean, really, the topic was around parents' expectations. But so that was just the expectation from my dad. And I mean, I was one of 4 kids, and so we all went and got degrees. And I suppose at the time it was good advice, but it was just like that was just the way it was. We never questioned it. It was never even an option, right? And also at the same time, my dad also said, you go to university. We supported ourselves through university, and so I mean, and we all managed to do it. And so, like, I think sometimes that, living up to those parental expectations is not always a bad thing, because sometimes I think it can be like a benchmark that you measure yourself against. But I think the problem comes in when that becomes the whole basis of your value, right? And when you then internalize that, and then you think that is what makes you valuable, or what makes you worthy, or
that's the only thing that makes you valuable.
that's the only thing that makes you worthy, right? So I think that's where it becomes really, really difficult to. You give me the horrible job. You give me the horrible job.
It's not that bad. It's quite satisfying. Give me another one.
Oh, yes, we do. Okay, it's kind of satisfying. In a squishy kind of way.
So just quickly say what we're making. So we're mixing up mixed ground beef, half pork, half beef.
Gherkins,
chopped onions, which are currently frying a little bit. A little bit
grate
of
the carrot.
garlic. I'm gonna grate some carrots. I'm gonna go mix that together with some mustard, some general beef meat spice mix, and some paprika. And then form some patties out of that. So.
But so how do you think that translates into how you parent, right?
Well, it's an interesting question, because that has been an endless source of discussion between my ex-wife and I. Because similar to our friends, she grew up completely differently in a family where academic achievements were not a topic, right? Because there were no academics, essentially. There was no value in any kind of education or like higher education, no perceived value. So they all had very practical professions, hands-on professions. Which again is not in any way good or bad. It's just the way it is. So I'm not saying this is one thing is better than the other. It's just that was her reality. And so me coming from this background where I do believe that academic achievement is important. Wait, we're not done yet here. We still need the breadcrumbs.
We need to add the carrots as well.
And the carrots as well, actually. A little bit of that here. And so for me, in a way, I'm with my whole mindset, I'm in an interesting middle ground, because I do not necessarily believe that in today's world, academia or any academic achievements will count for much anymore, simply because times are changing so rapidly with AI and how we utilize knowledge and how knowledge is formed.
Some pepper.
But at the same time, what I do believe having an academic education does for you is that it teaches you how to, in many cases,
Think.
Most importantly, how to come up with your own ideas.
Like critical thinking.
Critical thinking.
Yeah.
Although there's a whole new discussion to be had about, I don't know, if that's still the case in today's academia, if we're looking at the whole wokeness explosion in the traditional universities, which seem to point the other way, but it's a different topic of discussion. But
not criticism, but critical thinking, like being able to like ask the right question. What do you mean?
No, like that, being able to have your own opinion and to criticize certain topics is something which I always believe you go to university to learn how to take different viewpoints, how to think, how to
argue a certain point,
how to take the other position, how to try to put yourself in the other party's position, and then try to come to a conclusion that looks very good. But it feels like that's no longer the case, because there are certain topics you almost can't discuss things openly anymore, because people are immediately offended, or need to have the safe space and all that bullshit. So the question is that still valid? But for me, that's certainly a part of this academic education. And where I see the value in this still is that learning how to think, and not only learning to consume, right? Which we're seeing right now. And we had a discussion recently about this whole social media generation. It doesn't learn how to think, right? That's what I found most shocking, right?
So,
So the question was, what's my expectation with regards to that? So,
or how's it shaped your expectation of your children?
Definitely, I do have a certain expectations for my kids, because they are very smart kids, to at least try to get into academia. I'm not saying they need to have some academic job later on in their life, because...
But to do some higher education, I think is what you mean.
Yeah, but to at least try with some sort of higher education.
Yeah. It's difficult though when your partner doesn't agree, right? And doesn't value that, and doesn't see the importance of that. So basically, like, she had different expectations from her parents and to the expectations that you had from your parents. And so it creates a sort of like almost like a values gap, right? Where it's like, it's a very interesting topic. And then on top of it, the whole world of AI and how that's shaping the next generation. And, I think it's very difficult to navigate any of those kind of conversations nowadays, because we just don't know what the future holds. So
the expectation is, in a way, to follow my footsteps and at least dabble in some sort of academic education or higher education. Because while I'm not sure about the actual value it will have in the future, and I can say the same for myself, but I always said I could have done everything I've done without ever studying, right?
No.
Because like my degree was nice to have. So my master's degree was in marketing services, communications management, and then later my doctorate was in public healthcare management. But I could have, any of my businesses, and pretty much anything I did in my life professionally, I could have done without that, because it was mostly learning on the job anyway. But that being said, what it did was, the piece of paper I had opened me some doors, for sure.
Doors, exactly.
In particular, because I went to a quite prestigious university here in Europe. And that did help, because people were like, oh, you studied here, there. Amazing. And the other part is just that, learning how to think, how to really work under pressure.
I think it's working under pressure.
That's another thing, because
Okay, so I mean, it was, but I think we've spoken a lot about the sort of material things of those expectations. But I think what we haven't spoken about is the emotional impact of these expectations, and
Oh yeah.
and just that feeling of not being good enough when you disappoint your parents, or when you feel like you haven't lived up to their expectations. I think that was also what came up in our conversation with our friends. Just that that they can make you feel like a naughty child, or like a disappointing child, or something, that they can still trigger that emotion in you.
Oh, 100%.
Even when you're an adult. I think that's what's so fascinating, is that we still have such strong emotional ties to those expectations.
Oh, 100%. I can fully attest to that, as you know. Like, I often have this, what we're going to call it, imposter syndrome, where I feel like whatever I'm doing is never enough, right?
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
because
And I think that's the problem, is that it has an impact on how you perceive yourself all the way through your life, right?
And how your self-worth is formed as well, right?
Exactly. Okay, so I think that's the interesting part of the conversation, really, where how does one reconcile that emotional feeling with the reality, like you can, as you say, you can be super successful and super, you can have achieved all sorts, and yet there's, because I think your parents are almost like your first critics, and so like maybe it becomes that little inner critic in a way. How's this taste?
Very nicely.
Does it need something more? Does it need more salt?
No,
What?
no. For once, it doesn't need more salt. Usually, my favorite saying is "needs more salt." I'm not sure if should it make it a little bit more of that breadcrumbs to make it a bit more
delicious. It's really good.
very good.
We've never got it right the first time.
Maybe today is the first time.
That's amazing. We're getting better and better at this. I think they're good, man. What do you think? Needs more breadcrumbs or not?
It feels a bit
sticky.
bit soft almost. Like
Okay. Well,
maybe a little bit more. Okay.
if you add, I'll squish.
Yeah, and so, but I think that's, in general, right, that's the constant battle as a parent, the lifelong battle as a parent. How do you take one position when parenting and not traumatize your kids with that particular position, right? Because it almost feels like whatever you do as a parent is never going to be right. You can be very strict, so you always going to be the one who was too strict and cause some sort of trauma. You can be too relaxed in your
and then your
education,
children kind of potentially not achieve anything.
And we never had any structure, right? Yeah. So you'll hear that. So I think it's But
having said that, I also think, like my ex's parents were very, very relaxed, and there was not much structure in that home, and the kids were honestly kind of given free rein. It's like almost like his parents were like Waldorf hippies. Lovely, lovely people, but honestly like Waldorf hippies. And they produced 3 very successful children. And so, I think this is also the other thing, is that we, like you say, we're so wary of kind of like re-traumatizing our children. I use the word trauma lightly there. I'm not saying it's trauma, but
sure.
But we've become so hyper aware of the impact of parenting on our children, and on we've become so hyper aware of these expectations, and et cetera, and maybe it's gone a little bit too far. Maybe we need to just sort of relax a little bit and just go with our gut instinct in terms of parenting. But I think our children, at the end of the day, they've got to also find their own path and follow their own path.
Yeah.
But it's to find that balance between supporting them and helping them find the right path. And at the same time, like, do you put some pressure on them? Do you not? Or what's a good amount of pressure? What's not? What's a good amount of sort of criticism? What's too much? And I think we've become so hyper aware of that it becomes very difficult to know what to do.
Also, almost scared of that, right?
Yeah.
Because you don't want to screw up.
Yeah.
It seems like it's very easy to screw up these days. And for me, I think the most important thing is that you teach your kids to form their own opinion based on their own thought process, right? So I think it's less important to teach them exactly what to think and what to do and how to do it, because whether they like that or not, they will decide later in their life anyway.
But I think you also want to teach your kids how to critically look at information and how to think, because I think there's also so much where they're finding these source of truth, right? So I think you also want to teach your kids critical thinking, right? And teach them to have their own opinions and to form their own opinions, but those opinions need to be based on fact and not on TikTok.
That's true. And TikTok doesn't teach you how to think. TikTok teaches you how to consume.
It's just consume,
one single bit of information at once, and that changes every 5 seconds into a different topic. And that for me is the biggest problem around TikTok, right? Because you never.
And it becomes a bit of an echo chamber, right? So the more you watch a certain point of view,
of course, the algorithms kick in and just reward you for watching a certain opinion, and then you're gonna be stuck with that for a while. And that's the dangerous thing about
social media
echo chambers. The algorithms prevent you from seeing
any other alternative opinions or alternative views.
Correct. Different viewpoints, because all of a sudden, whether you're left-leaning, right-leaning, if we talk about political stuff, all of a sudden you only see the extreme of that, right? You don't see the other side, the other opinion, in a reflected way. So, but coming back to the topic of parental expectations, I think it can be very harsh, even in a lot of grown-up people, right? And it's sometimes crazy how you see people who are 50, 60 years old, and still you can hear the parents speaking figuratively or quite sometimes literally. Right.
Oh my God.
In their mind, right. So we also.
So how do you break that cycle, right?
Yes, I'm a big fan of Jordan Peterson, at least in some of his approaches, and he always said, if you're like fully grown by the age of 30, and you still listen to your parents' opinion, then there's something wrong with that relationship.
It also means you haven't individuated. You haven't actually separated yourself from your parents.
Precisely. You haven't found your own way in life.
And your own voice?
Your own voice, and you're still dependent on your parents' voice, quite literally.
God, I mean, we both know somebody who basically, her mother runs her life, right? I mean,
of course, at
as
age
a
50, right?
50-year-old woman, I mean, it's just quite shocking, really, to me.
Yeah. If you're not if you're afraid to form your own opinion, because at age 50, because your mother might be mad at you for having that opinion, right? It is quite.
And then that mother has so much influence over her
so many aspects of life,
and
right?
so many aspects of her life and her family's life, etc. I mean, it's and unfortunately she's very toxic, right? So I mean, that's a recipe for disaster where you allow that parent to become too much of a central figure in your life, and you haven't individuated and you haven't become your own person. You haven't learned to critically think for yourself, and you just actually just default to whatever your mother says. I mean, that's just pathological, actually.
Yeah. But then it shows you exactly how that influence can persist over the decades, not even years, over the decades, and until late in your adulthood.
So why do you think that happened with that particular person?
I think a lot of times, and it's again me speaking from my experience, it is quite hard if you're growing up in an environment where your opinion is not heard or accepted, right?
Validated, yeah.
Or maybe even more extreme, you're being reprimanded for having your own opinion, right? Or for raising your concerns or raising your own voice.
Yeah.
As a young human being growing up, that's really tough to get out, right? That's not easy to.
So it's like when you've got a very domineering kind of parent or very domineering kind of parental presence. Do we want to cook them now or do we want to cook them later?
Let's cook them now.
Okay. And what we heat them?
Yeah.
Okay.
And they're done.
I mean, do you think that was the case with this person? That the mother was very domineering? I mean, she's certainly very opinionated.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I think that was. I mean, and I've seen this with this particular family as a whole.
Yeah.
That mother takes the role of the matriarch in a whole family. I think no one.
In a very domineering kind of way.
In a very domineering and very.
Not in a like a caring.
No, in a very. I would say in a very toxic way.
Yeah,
many aspects, in a very frustrating way.
I think also the problem is that I think she's got a lot of financial control, right? Or financial influence, let's say.
Financial influence, exactly, over other family members.
Yeah.
To some extent, living off other family members, right? By essentially taking control of their assets. And and everyone in that particular family.
Did you pull up my sleeve?
Knows the truth and.
I might just have to fold it up. Thanks. That's perfect. Thank you. That's perfect.
Everyone in the family knows
that it's happening.
Knows that it's happening, and I know that everyone in the family talks about that, and for everyone it's an issue. But still, no one
stands up to her. Nobody separates themselves from that dynamic, right? Yeah.
No one has the guts to separate, which is also understandable, right?
Because they're also financially dependent on her, right? Or dependent in some way on her.
Yeah. So
she's also created that dynamic.
That's exactly the thing. Like that person is very good at creating these dependencies on herself, where it seems like. Yeah. And actually, it's one of the arguments that person brings up that you couldn't live without me, right? So she means it quite literally. It's like I'm the one who keeps things afloat.
Yeah.
Where in reality, she's the one sucking everyone dry and pretends then to be the one who's keeping the ball in the air. Why? Quite the opposite. If she wouldn't.
If she hadn't sucked from other people and taken advantage of other people, she wouldn't. She wouldn't be in that position to be able to do that.
No, absolutely not.
And to be able to then manipulate those sort of underneath her in a way. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
So
right. Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so fascinating. It's I don't know. It sort of screams narcissism to me.
It's fascinating, but it's also quite sad to watch because in particular in this case, but it can also be in other cases, that causes like multi-generational issues. So in this specific case, this is literally spanning 4 generations now, right? So there's still some older members of the family being alive.
Yeah.
And then there's the generation below, and then the grandkids, and they're all being influenced, and to some extent they're all suffering from that behavior,
Yeah.
for lack of a better word.
Yeah, very domineering, quite controlling her and her expectations. And she's also quite verbal about what she thinks is acceptable and not acceptable.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah.
And then she also creates that pressure within that family to behave in a certain way that's expected, right? And if you step out, then you can very easily be the persona non grata, right?
Yeah. So it gives her control, right? It gives her a feeling of control. It gives her power. Essentially, at the end of the day, it gives her power. And and she exercises it, right? Very toxic.
Yeah.
But so there's an example of like people not being able, not wanting to disappoint and not wanting to break away from those expectations and not wanting to break away from that dynamic because they essentially feel a bit controlled by those things, which allows the other person
not a bit, quite a bit controlled.
Yeah.
Or completely controlled.
Yeah. I think that one needs to be a bit bigger. Should I just add that to that?
Yes, just add that, and I think we're good.
But I think that's also why it's so important for teenagers to individuate and to, as a healthy parent, to allow your child to become their own person. And it really, I think you've got those early years of childhood, to really have an influence on your child and shape their values. And then from there, I think once they become teenagers, they naturally have to start separating from you. And naturally your influence over them needs to decline. And you need to enable and allow them to express their own opinions, decide what's important to them, all while at the same time offering guidance and support and to balance or to be very, I think, aware of what your expectations are of your children and where they're coming from and why they're important. And I think it's okay to have expectations, but as long as those expectations are not toxic, are not misaligned with that child, are not detrimental to that child, or not unachievable, etc. Because we also don't want to break that child's confidence. And at the same time, that child needs to be able to become their own person and differentiate themselves, right?
And that's for me maybe one of the most important points, that you can have expectations. Yes, that's fine. You probably should have expectations. You should set boundaries, but you should not make your children feel like their value depends on your expectation.
Exactly.
Because once you do that, then you trap them in a position where they can only ever, or they think they can only ever find love when they meet the expectation. And most likely, they're not going to meet the expectation in one way or the other.
No.
So they will not feel loved, and they will...
Or they won't believe that they're loved, because they haven't...
Or they even can be loved, right? Because,
that exist in their own head, right? So.
Or they maybe feel like they cannot ever
achieve
meet those
expectations. Yeah. So interesting, because at the end of the day, that then... So I think that often when people feel that they can only be loved if they meet certain requirements, it's a form of insecure attachment, right? Where you don't feel that you love just for being who you are. You feel like you love because of what you've achieved, or for certain behaviors, or
what you represent, what ideology you believe in, maybe even what religion you believe in, what political party you believe in, right? Can
extend to all of
these topics, right?
But so that speaks to secure attachment versus an insecure attachment. So if you have a secure attachment with your parent, you know that you're loved. You know that you can count on that person to be there for you, even if you don't get good grades, or even if you mess something up, or even if you flunk out of university, you still trust that your parents might be a bit disappointed, or they might be even angry or upset, but they still love you, and you know that that's still a safe space for you to go back to, right? Whereas, so that really is the foundation of a secure attachment. Whereas if you feel like, if I flunk out of university, I can't go home, my parents will reject me, they will shun me, I will not be welcome home, or if I don't get this degree, my parents are, going to be endlessly disappointed by me, etc. Where you feel like those achievements are what earn you love, then that's where it's sort of speaking to an insecure attachment, or when you feel like your behavior has to be a certain way in order to be loved or accepted. So it's all back to attachment, which I find so fascinating.
And is that like a theory, secure attachment theory? Because I've never heard. Okay, never.
So attachment theory, there's a whole lot written about attachment theory. And you get secure attachment and insecure attachment. And the reality is that we all have an attachment to our parents or our primary caregivers. And it doesn't necessarily have to be your mom and dad or your parents. It can be another sort of significant caretaker in your life. But every child needs a secure attachment, preferably two, but at least one, in order to form like a healthy view of the world, themselves, relationships, etc. Like that primary attachment is so critically fundamental to being human, and it's so important that it's and if those primary relationships that you have as a child are healthy, it means you're much more likely to have healthy relationships growing up and going, and in your future life. Whereas if you don't have secure, healthy attachments as a child, it keeps playing out in your life later in your life.
And that's maybe an interesting topic to discuss, because how does that affect the next generation?
Exactly.
Because if you grow up with the impression that you cannot fulfill certain expectations, for example, right? But you're always running behind and meeting these expectations, how does that shape your future relationships, right? So how does it shape the expectation you then have in your partner, you then have in your kids? And I think it's a pretty safe bet to say that for a lot of these people, that then just keeps going, right? Because you have the same expectations, and you maybe have certain expectations in your partner, and because you never learned that value of yourself, your being, your identity is separated from
your achievements,
or from the expectations, you will always connect the value of your partner or the value of your children with certain expectations that you have. Exactly. It might not be the same, but there might be that connection still, that your partner is only valuable if he or she behaves in a certain way, or your children are only good children if they behave in a certain way.
And I think that's why it's so important to become conscious and to become aware of these things, because otherwise you just risk perpetuating this cycle. I think the other interesting thing about attachment is that one typically then, you typically land up repeating the same pattern. So if you had a parent that was super critical, where you felt like you were never good enough, you felt like your value was attached to certain achievements, etc. If that was your experience growing up, you'll most likely look for a partner that gives you the same feeling, because it's familiar. So you understand that model, you understand that that's how it works, you understand. And so that's actually, I think, what often happens, not always, but I think that often happens where a person lands up in a similar situation where, okay, so your parents had certain expectations of you that you had to achieve X, Y, and Z, and that was where your worth lay, and that was what made you lovable. You most likely will land up in a relationship where that person has the same expectations of you, that you're only worthy if you achieve X, Y, and Z, that your value lies in those external achievements, for example, etc. So I think that that's also what often happens, is you land up repeating that cycle.
And why do you think that is? Why do you think that you could say, if you had a negative experience, you would be seeking the opposites? Why do you think people seek the same pattern in their new partner that they probably tried to avoid when they were younger, or they didn't know it was toxic, or it didn't feel right, or put some immense pressure on them. Why do people then seek the same pattern in their relationship?
I think it goes back to what it makes you believe that. So I think that, you know, growing up like that, you internalize that. That becomes one of your beliefs, that you believe that your value is only as it relates to your achievements or your those external things. So I think you internalize that as a belief, right? And so then when you meet somebody who sort of has the same dynamic, it confirms those beliefs.
Yeah, okay.
And so you're much more likely to just kind of enter into a relationship or a relationship dynamic with that person because it feels comfortable. You're actually familiar with it. Even though it might not be nice or might not be healthy, you're familiar with it.
And maybe you also know
and you
how
believe
to behave.
that.
You believe that, and also you know in a certain way what to do and how to behave, right? Because there's certain, I know this from myself, because growing up with this constant pressure of dealing with these expectations, I then started to develop certain protective behaviors, right? In my how I react to stress, how I react to conflict, right? And so I learned how to behave to avoid or to minimize damage, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Damage control, exposure control. And what I can fully understand is if you have someone who is completely different and you never learned how to, for example, now deal with the fact that maybe your emotions are accepted, right? It's much easier to say, okay, well, maybe I get the same abuse from my partner, but at least how to
cope with that. I'm an expert at this.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I've had all my life learning how to protect myself and how to behave in a way that I'm least exposed.
Yeah. And also you believe that about yourself.
And that, yes. Yeah.
You know, so that new person or that new relationship that you're in just confirms those old beliefs. And I think that this so often happens in early relationships in your adulthood, you know, and it's like as your consciousness grows, and I think that that's why often second marriages or third marriages or whatever later relationships, I think, are often much healthier because hopefully as you go through life, you grow and you learn more about yourself. And there's that element of self-discovery and looking at your own beliefs or looking at your own patterns. And you can, if you can, then consciously be aware of what's been going on, what's attracted you to that type of relationship or that type of person, then you can start to be able to sort of break that cycle. And then also, I think often if you choose to parent consciously, you can also then break that cycle, you know, where you don't bring up your kids with the same patterns. But it's the same, I mean, like, for example, it's, I don't have any personal experience with this, but from what I've heard, people who've been in abusive households, you know, where they've had abuse from their mother or their father, are also then more likely to land up in abusive relationships. And it's because they come to expect that, and it's sort of normalized from when they're children. Not to say that everybody who is in an abusive relationship comes from an abusive household. That's not what I'm saying. But people, they kind of, it's familiar. Not good, but familiar, right? So,
but it's interesting that we prioritize familiarity over suffering, almost.
Yeah, and yet it perpetuates the suffering, right?
It does, yes, but that's a good point. But it seems to be like we're more likely to accept our own suffering as long as it's familiar.
Yeah.
That to expose ourselves to something which is unfamiliar.
Yeah. And you've got to learn a new way of being or existing.
And where we haven't created the pattern
around
it yet.
So interesting. You know, but I mean, it also speaks to like neural wiring and how you're wired. And those early childhood years are so, you know, they really create the foundations of that wiring of your brain, you know,
Yeah.
and then your brain rewires when you're a teenager, which is, I think, also why it's so important as a teenager to then sort of individuate and separate yourself from your parent, right? Because that's a rewiring phase. You've got to learn new ways of interacting, new ways of being in the world, new ways of having relationships with your peers and with other people. You've got to learn to separate from your primary attachment. And I do think that your primary attachment needs to always be maintained. You know, it needs to, that primary attachment also needs to be there for you in the background, right? So that you know when the shit hits the fan that you can still go back to that primary attachment while you go off and explore the world as a teenager, and while you go off and explore new relationships and new ways of being in the world, you know. But so sorry, what did you say? What got me onto that?
That a lot of times we prioritize familiarity over the suffering.
Yeah. So basically it's that wiring element. It's like how your brain is wired to be in relationship. And so I think if you're then in a completely different relationship dynamic, it requires rewiring. And it's a bit like having to learn a new language, right? It's hard work, or it feels like hard work.
But then how do you break the pattern? How do you break the cycle of looking for the same, almost like abusive pattern in new relationships?
I don't even know if I'd say abusive, but I just think if, you know, because it's not that it's always abusive. It's just a dynamic. It's just a pattern, right? So, I mean, I think at the end of the day, so much of it has to start with self-awareness. You've got to, and I think that's why parenting is so
difficult,
but also you if you choose to, you can grow so much when you become a parent, because you confronted with your own beliefs, your own biases. You also confronted with the fact that your partner wants to parent differently to how you want to parent. And it's like, well, why do you want to parent that way? Well, it's because like that's how I was parented, and now you've got to find a compromise. Otherwise, you're going to be in endless conflict with your partner. But so I think that becoming a parent often highlights your own patterns, your own expectations, your own attachment style, all of these things. And if you choose to, it can then really be a time of growth and of better understanding yourself while you're raising your children. So I think, and also you look at your parents and you look at those primary attachments, you know, and it wasn't necessarily your parents, but you look at those early attachments or those attachments that you have with your parents through a different lens. And then you start thinking, or I certainly was then like, okay, well, how were my parents raised? How are they influenced by their parents? And that then opens up a whole new world where you start to sort of see these patterns and how these things can either get passed on from one generation to the other in a slightly different, modified way, but it's a very clear pattern often.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And
then I think through that awareness, you can then make a conscious decision, like, how do I want to raise my children? What's really important to me and my partner, you know?
And do I stop that behavior?
Yeah.
That multi-generational, I mean, trauma is always a big word, but like, do you want to stop? Does it stop with you, or do you keep
or do you keep repeating it?
Repeating it. Yeah.
And I think that's what's so interesting. I think, you know, if you think about it, psychology was not part of everyday conversations in the 1950s. You know, and your parents, when they raised you, or my parents, when they raised me, would not have known anything about attachment theory or the psychology of raising children, right? So I think there's been such an explosion in terms of understanding of the human mind, understanding of attachment, understanding of relationships, understanding of relationship dynamics, that actually we're in a very privileged position where we've got access to all that information. I mean, you can join any Facebook group or any, you know, Instagram group, or, you know, you've got access to so much really valuable information, or workshops, or magazines, or anything, you know, where you can have a better understanding of all of these things and then grow through that process and then change that cycle. So I think the pendulum might have swung a little bit too far. I think that we maybe over-psychologized everything. I think that maybe over-analyzing every interaction and every fight that we have with our kids. And I think that the pendulum is now starting to sort of maybe balance out, I hope. But I think that at the end of the day, we're in a very privileged position as this generation when we're raising the next generation, and how we parent them and how we accept them and how we support them and love them and etc. And let's see how they turn out, right?
Yeah. At the end of the day, it's a choice, right? It's a conscious choice that you can make. I think it's become way easier to break this pattern now, but you still have to make the conscious choice and to work on yourself, right? Because that's in essence what's required if you want to overcome these patterns. And two, just, you mentioned about where these behaviors originate in the family history.
Yeah.
So when I think about my father always has been a very authoritative, as I told, like, this Eastern European, he was like an older dad. Now this authoritative, there's no other opinion than my opinion kind of person. Also like a very choleric person, kind of would, go through the roof with the slightest annoyance. And then I heard at some point from my mother that when my father was young, like how when he would say the wrong thing, he would be beaten with the belts for hours, which my mother said she heard from someone that was almost like an execution, right? So there was like this old, children are there to be put into place, and there was a lot of physical violence going on. But I'm thinking, well, okay, so am I surprised about this certain behavior? Am I surprised that that he always reacted in a very black or white way when I behaved in a certain way? Because he learned that I can say for me it was tough because there was, it's this kind of education or kind of parenting that I grew up with, but that's probably a tenth of what he went through, right? Because there was physical abuse involved, emotional abuse. I'm sure, back in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, when he grew up.
It was a whole traumatized generation.
There was a traumatized generation. I'm sure there was not the same openness to the status of kids in the family, the status of children and with regards to their parents. And so of course, was it enjoyable for me? No, but do I understand where it's coming from? Of course, right? And
also your father would have viewed it like he was being gentle on you.
Yeah, exactly, right? In comparison, it's like exactly right. So. No.
And so in a way he did the best he could with let's call it the tool set that he had and the relationship dynamics that he understood. And in a way then you can say he actually did an incredibly good job. The fact that he didn't beat you and didn't
exactly. I think that there was never any physical violence when I was brought up. And so he stopped whatever he was able to stop from his perspective or from his history. From his trauma, maybe. Yeah, but I think every one of us also, most of us only can do so much, right? You can maybe it's really hard to get out of these patterns, and maybe you can stop. Maybe you can make sure that some of these things stop with you. But I'm also sure it's not always easy to stop all of the things.
Yeah, I think this is a challenge of being human, right? I think but I do believe that you can't change any of it unless you start with self-awareness and look into yourself. You can't change these cycles until you understand yourself better and understand your own beliefs and understand your own triggers, understand your own trauma or previous generations' trauma, etc. Like you've got to look at the bigger picture before you can change anything. So I don't go for therapy, but I think that therapy in that regard can be very, very useful when there's real trauma. And having somebody who can reflect with you and sort of take that journey alongside you, I think that can be very beneficial.
And I think a lot of times it's consciously going through the whole experience and thought process behind it. Right? That I think that oftentimes if you just sit down and try to consciously understand why am I behaving the way I'm behaving, right? And it's true for my own behavior, right? If I sometimes I behave in a certain way, and then I'm thinking, hey, wait a second, why am I like this, right? And just sitting down saying, well, okay, so what emotion did that trigger in me, right? What was I feeling in that moment when I was behaving a certain way? And if you then just sit down and say, okay, there was something that triggered something in me. And by triggering this emotion, I went into attack mode, I went into defense mode, whatever it is. That's then how I behaved, right? Or into nice mode, right? Into nice mode.
Keep everybody happy mode.
Yeah, exactly, right? It's like it's and that's maybe also an important thing to say about parenting and parental expectations. It's not always, when we talk about traumas and the result of traumas, it's not always that's the result of something horrible like violence and mental abuse or physical abuse, whatever. It can also end up in patterns which are seemingly
socially acceptable,
right? Or
but so for example, like with you, I've seen how you are just the most amazing nice guy, and you do so much to keep everybody happy and make people laugh, and and so that's an incredibly powerful defense mechanism, really, which has served you very well. And I think that is also your natural nature, where you are a good guy, you're a nice guy, you're funny, charming, all that kind of thing. But it's interesting that sometimes that pattern shows up when you suss out a situation and you think, this is a delicate situation. Am I in trouble? Have I done something wrong? And when that surfaces because of that, as long as it's authentic and genuine, it's perfect. But when it's masking, or when it's like a mechanism in order to protect yourself, then I think it's just good to be aware of it, because
it can also be to my detriment, right?
And I think that's the problem, is that often it's to your detriment, where you being the nice guy and being the peacekeeper and being the peacemaker, when actually maybe you absolutely have a right to be upset,
to speak up
or
and
angry,
to say no,
or
right?
to say no.
Exactly, right. Which is
Yeah.
one big issue, and I mean that particular example is interesting because it's something that I'm aware of. Where, as you say, I'm a nice guy, and often I'm maybe too much of a nice guy. But it's also coming from, and I'm also typically I try to avoid conflict. Right? There's, I'm a bear poker to some extent, as we know. But day to day, like I try to avoid conflict because I don't think it's just it doesn't help anyone. But always being nice also comes from this defense mechanism that I grew up with, where if you're being, coming back to parenting part of things, if you're being judged by how you behave, if you're being criticized by pretty much everything, being nice offers you kind of the least attack surface, right? And so by being nice, that was my way of coping it and staying out of trouble, quote unquote, right? And of course, this has now turned into something which is, in certain situations, unhealthy, where I should say, okay, well, I do have the right to say no. I do have to no, I don't always need to be nice if I don't like certain things, or I should have the right, I do have the right to speak up about certain things. But I know I understand where it's coming from, and I'm trying to work on, as stupid as it sounds, often to be less nice in certain areas. Yeah.
And so this is the thing, until you can be aware of those patterns and where they come from and why you're doing them, you can't change the dynamic, right? And, for example, I grew up with 3 siblings, right? We were always fighting. I don't know how my mother put up with us, but we were always fighting. And so I also became very used to conflict, right? Fighting, shouting at each other, sticking up for yourself, etc. And so the good thing about growing up with siblings and fighting is that you learn to deal with conflict. And you also learn that you can have conflict and, you still love your sister or your brother, maybe not the next day, but the next week. No, I'm kidding. But you learn that conflict is okay and that it's not the end of the relationship. Whereas I think I can understand why you avoid conflict, because you were an only child and you also were in a situation where you were much safer being the peacekeeper, being the nice guy, being the perfect son, right? But it means that conflict for you is very, very uncomfortable.
No, absolutely.
Oh. And I think that there's a place for conflict. I think that there's a place for...
We need to eat one, unfortunately.
Yeah.
It's all falling apart.
And I think that a bit of conflict can be very healthy, right? Should we finish up? Should we finish up?
Yeah.
So keep the oven on, love.
Oh, what time is it? 4.
Early. We're going to eat it much later.
Yeah. I think the whole topic of parental expectations, you can go down different
rabbit holes. Right?
Rabbit holes.
Oh.
From trauma to parenting to how you deal with your own expectations, disappointments, relationships. So I think there are many interesting areas you can
explore further, right?
But yeah, so given that we're done with our delicious Fleischpflanzerl, we'll leave it here.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for listening. Again, it would really help us if you would like, subscribe, comment, talk about this channel, share it with your friends if you like it. And as always, if you have anything you would love us to discuss, please drop us a comment. Let us know what you would like to hear. And thanks for listening.
Chat soon. Bye.
Bye-bye. Good.